Okay, here we
Refresh
go,
the page.
guys.
I did. It's under posts.
All right, we are live again. Apologies for the false start. Welcome back. If you're just now joining us, we had some technical difficulties, and it looks like our video was disrupted and taken down before. So we're going to restart this, and this time we get to start it off the right way. So I want to start off by introducing our two guests today. First one is Greg. He's the one with the background there. Go ahead and give us a quick introduction about you, Greg.
Oh, my mic's on. Okay.
Preferably when your mic's on, yeah.
Yeah, would help. My name's Greg Thielen, and 30 years in the car business, and more of a conservative, but socially a libertarian, or maybe even a little bit progressive.
Ooh, interesting. Welcome, man. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. I know some of your buddies are going to be watching tonight, so they'll have their eyes on you. So thank you again for joining us. Appreciate it, man. And then I wanted to welcome back to the broadcast Charles. Charles, if you don't remember, was with us on the third podcast. Charles, it's great to have you back, man. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you guys for having me here. I'm pretty much progressive, but I'm open-minded to all things, and I'm really stoked to be here for this show tonight.
I'm glad. We're stoked to have you here. Thanks for making the time. Really appreciate it.
No
So again, we're going to start this show off as if the first 4-minute and 20-second video never happened. So I want to start off the conversation tonight by asking an open question. The charges against Derek Chauvin and other officers, as you guys know, there have been charges that have come down against Derek Chauvin first, and then subsequently the 4 officers. And the question I want to pose first to Amanda is, do you think the DA is overcharging, and do you think there's risks to overcharging?
I'm going to start with the second question. So
Okay.
The risks to overcharging in any case can be an acquittal. It can be a situation like with Casey Anthony, where she was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse for the death of her daughter, Kaylee. And the jury said, you don't have any proof of what you need for these charges. So they found her not guilty of everything related to the death of her child. So you risk a jury rejecting everything. And overcharging typically doesn't happen for your more privileged or rich or professional field defendants. They're more likely to happen with your poor defendants who are going to be willing to take a bad deal just to get out of jail, or they're going to cave to that type of pressure in an overcharging situation. But I don't think these officers have been overcharged. When they were originally charged, when Derek Chauvin was originally charged, he was charged with third-degree murder, which sounds like it's pretty low, but the legal standard for it under Minnesota law is basically second-degree murder everywhere else. They don't have to prove an intent to kill. They just have to prove that he did an act that was eminently dangerous to human life with a depraved heart or mind, which means no regard to human life or reckless indifference to human life, which they can obviously prove with respect to his conduct in this case. Everybody wanted it to be elevated to second-degree murder. And the typical second-degree murder charge in Minnesota does require an intent to kill, which I don't think they can prove under the facts that we have in this case. So when Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, came in to help with the prosecution and decide if charges needed to be upgraded or added to the other 3 officers, with a more obscure version of second-degree murder under Minnesota law known as the felony murder rule. They don't have to prove intent to kill. All they have to prove is that certain types of felonies, there's a list of them for every state, they have to prove that a felony on that list was committed, in this case, an assault on George Floyd, and that during the commission of that specified felony, somebody died. It could be George Floyd, it could be an accomplice, it could be a bystander, it could be a police officer. It doesn't matter. And that's why felony murder rule is considered a very controversial doctrine under the law, because it's usually applied to the people who don't do the thing that kills somebody. It's applied to the getaway driver whose buddy the robbery accidentally shoots the store clerk and he had no idea that his friend was going to do that. Or in the case of Lakeith Smith out of Baltimore, Maryland, several years ago, he and his buddy were breaking into houses and a police officer responded and shot his friend and killed his friend. So Lakeith Smith was convicted of murder, even though he never pulled the trigger. So it's a controversial area of the law. It's less controversial when they're charging it to the person who actually killed somebody. And it's the same theory of prosecution that's being used in Georgia to prosecute the McMichaels and the third guy for Ahmaud Arbery's death. And in that case, it's also an assault that they're saying was committed. For the other three officers, they're going to have to prove that these guys were aiders and abettors to second-degree murder under the felony murder rule. So that they aided and abetted in the assault, not necessarily in the death, but the assault that resulted in a death. I think that's going to be pretty easy for them to prove for the two officers who are on top of him. I think it'll be also maybe a little less easy to prove for the officer who just kind of stands there watching the crowd and keeping people away from them. But at the end of the day, I think they have evidence, strong evidence for all four officers, especially Derek Chauvin. So I don't think in this case they're overcharged. I think if they upgraded to first-degree murder for Derek Chauvin, then they'd be risking an acquittal.
And it's interesting because a lot of people in the wake of this were actually calling for first degree murder. But a lot of those people don't know the law as well as you do. So
yeah, well, and for first degree murder, not only would they have to prove that specific intent to kill, I want to kill, I desire to kill this person and I'm going to kill that person, but also premeditation and deliberation. That standard does not require extensive planning. It just requires reflection on the consequences of what you're about to do, and you have the desire to do it. They can't
Gotcha.
prove that, when you're in public in broad daylight with tons of witnesses, all have cameras, you have a body cam as an officer, your fellow officers have body cams, that he thought, I'm going to kill this person and now I'm going to do it and I want to do it and I'm reflecting on the consequences before I do it. They
Right.
can't prove that.
So as a follow-up to that, and then I want to get to somebody else here. What are your predictions as far as the trial goes with the information that we know now? Do you anticipate the officers being convicted as charged?
Chauvin, I think he's going to get convicted as charged. If he doesn't, then it's going to be third-degree murder. I think that, like I said, the officers who are actually on George Floyd's body, actually holding him down, also have a good chance of being convicted. I think one of the officers, Thomas Lane, was actually 4 days out of training. So I think he actually could have a decent defense because he's expected to stop the actions of a 19-year veteran when he's the rookie. He's the lowest on the totem pole. He has no authority. And at one point in the video, he even asks if they should be turning George Floyd on his side, like for his safety, and he's shut down on that. So he could actually potentially have a defense there in terms of being an aider and abetter. He doesn't want this to happen. And that matters. It's not just that you help, it's not just that you know what's happening, it's that you intend for the crime to be committed as a result of your help and knowledge.
Absolutely.
And so, but I could also see the other officers getting convicted of manslaughter as aiders and abettors of a lesser crime. There are a lot of options for the jury. They're going to have to start with second-degree murder, though, and decide whether or not these officers are guilty or not guilty before moving to any lesser included offenses.
Right. And as most of us know, an officer being charged with a crime is a very rare occurrence. So for someone who is a public defender to say that she thinks that this may result in these officers getting convicted is frankly astounding on its own. So
well, you have to remember that this isn't the first time Minneapolis has charged a police officer with second degree, third degree, or manslaughter. Mohammed Noor, exactly.
Yep.
And he was charged with second degree. I'm not sure if it was under felony murder doctrine or not, third degree and manslaughter, and he went down for third degree and manslaughter. He was found not guilty of second degree murder. So
for those of the audience who aren't familiar with the situation, Kylan, can you give us a recap on what happened with that particular case?
I believe this was about 3 or 4 years ago. Mohammed Noor was a Minneapolis Police Department. I cannot remember the name of the woman who was killed.
Justine Hammond.
Yep, she was from Australia. Yep, she was from Australia, and Mohammed Noor shot and killed her. and Mohammed Noor was actually convicted on the very same charges that Derek Chauvin has been charged with. And so I believe he was sentenced to, was it, I believe 12 or 14 years, something along those lines. Yeah, so,
Well,
and so it definitely was, that was actually the first police officer in Minnesota to be convicted. And so, a lot of ways to unpack on that, which I'm not going to, but, so there is precedent, for a conviction in this instance.
mhm.
Understood. Yeah, thank you for that. I want to go to Robert on this next question here. Regarding the charges against Chauvin and the other 4 officers, what are your thoughts? Do you think justice has been done in this case?
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
thus far, at least. but-
Yeah, I was about to say
Yeah.
thus far, it has been. I mean, hopefully they get charged with the second-degree murder and they're found guilty.
Yeah.
Because they're 100% guilty of that. There's no debate on that, for sure.
And I wanted to ask you another question because generally speaking, those, and I'm not saying you in particular, but generally those on the right tend to want to defend police officers more than the assailant. Can you think of a situation aside from this one where you said that officer was out of line?
Yeah, the Philando Castile. That was one case in particular.
Mhm.
There's probably others that I could think of as well. I think the problem that we see most of the time is when an officer shoots when the victim doesn't have a gun and they don't use some kind of secondary, or not secondary, but non-lethal force before, where an officer doesn't use a taser or at least try to use some kind of pepper spray and results straight into a firing of even a person that may have something like a baseball bat. If they go straight to using their gun, I'm more than happy to call it what it is, and that's a extreme use, excessive for use of force. Excuse me, sorry. But yeah, any case where an officer's out of line, where they're not at least trying to de-escalate the situation, and their first use is reaching to their gun and shooting somebody.
Yeah.
Is an easy call of excessive force.
Very good. Very good. Same question to Mr. Greg Thielen. Can you think of a situation where you felt like a cop was out of line that isn't exactly this one or Philando Castile, as Robert just said?
There's many out there. Since I last talked to you, I did a little research. I saw a bunch of videos. There's tons of videos of excessive, but you don't know the beginning story or the backstory. That's the problem with some of the videos. But I saw videos of 14-year-old kids with a tobacco arrest, and the cop was actually punching this 14-year-old kid on the ground. That makes no sense. That's just downright stupid. We just had the incident in the Bay Area with the cops shooting somebody with a baseball bat in a store. It was like a couple months ago, right? So that one I would call on the edge because the person was armed and they could have tried other ways. There were more than enough cops there. It wasn't a one cop and one suspect. They had overpowering force of bodies, but they elected to shoot him. So they're going to use the standard I feared for my life
Kind of sounds like cowardice.
defense. And they were rightfully in fear of getting hurt, if not for their life. So they shot him. So there's plenty of cases where the emotions get involved, and I think the police go overboard, all under the color of authority. Maybe that's not quite the right term, but like I said, this whole case he's guilty of sin as far as I'm concerned. But my concern, can I twist off the subject a little?
Yeah, of course.
On that is, I think the first thing that, and Amanda, correct me, I think the first thing defense is going to do is go for a change of venue right off the top.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
That's what I would do.
And then that's when this case can get wonky. We've had other cops get off. I mean, Rodney King's, is that whole situation. They all got off, and look what happened in LA.
And Greg, we're going to
So-
get to Rodney King later, so I want to
Okay.
not get too
So-
much into that yet. So
So my point was they're going to change a venue. There's a lot of legal trickery that can still go on. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is a pessimist has experience. I've already seen it before. So, like I said, going back to the original question, there are videos after videos after videos. Hell, I've seen it in my own town of them rousting the homeless here by the river. For God's sake, they're by the river. Who are they messing with? It makes no sense. So yeah, I've seen it. Don't like it, but most of the time they get away with it because it's Amanda. What do they call it? Where they're immune?
Well,
Judicial.
so qualified immunity, and I think we're going to talk about that later, has to do with civil lawsuits. It's completely separate from whether or not they're prosecuted criminally, whether or not they're disciplined
Correct,
within the
yeah.
department. Yeah.
So that's
But a lot of times, just in general, with part of my job is doing motions to suppress under the Fourth Amendment when a police officer violates someone's rights against unreasonable, unlawful, warrantless searches and seizures. And the line we hear all the time is, well, the officer acted reasonably. He acted reasonably. And so that kind of concept of, an officer's reasonable beliefs, their reasonable actions, excuses a lot of things that they should not be doing to the
There's a
members.
wide range in that word.
Yeah. And then another thing we get a lot is officer safety. That I took this action for officer safety. And so they can use that terminology to kind of justify certain types of conduct that might not otherwise fly if they didn't use those buzzwords. You see it a lot with, an officer wants to give an opinion about something. So they say, well, based on my training and experience. And that allows it. So police are just given a lot of leeway in terms of what they can say and do that impacts our lives that gets excused in court.
agreed. And good insight there. I do have a Facebook question that I want to take here. This one comes from Livia Femelko. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but thank you for your question. This one is actually directed towards Robert, but I want to get everyone's thoughts on this one. And this was in response to potential excessive force. And the question is, but what if the officer is convinced the other person is pulling out a gun? It's not black and white. If you're in that situation, your brain thinks your life is on the line. The adrenaline to survive will take over, and you won't have the time to think about it twice. And you won't know how it feels until you've actually been at that point. Not including here the blatant abuses, of course. Robert, what are your thoughts on that comment?
I 100% agree. I mean, I have defended this plenty where I do think that police make the right call in certain situations that probably a lot of people on this panel would probably disagree with me on. And Greg kind of touched on that where he had said you kind of have to look more into the case because, just a story about someone being shot by a police officer is always going to be frowned upon, even if we may not know the story behind it on what exactly happened. I have other instances as well where I could argue that the police were unjustified by looking at the story behind it. And I agree that officers have not too much time to react to a situation where they think there may be a gun, but once they've made the wrong decision, it's going to be frowned upon, even if they thought there was a gun. Like what happened, I think that was in San Jose or LA, a guy had a hammer in his jacket and was shot and killed because the officer thought it was a gun. Well, I'm not. Oh,
Vallejo.
Excuse me. Yeah, more close to home. I'm not going to sit here and argue that the officer was in the right because he thought it was a gun. I mean, the officer was definitely in the wrong. So there are instances, and it's not black and white. I agree, but the ideas that I brought up were things that I thought personally were the officers were unjustified in their killings.
No, understood. And thank you for clarifying. I want to go to Amanda for some legal perspective on this.
So I want to preface this by saying, and I can say this because it's true, I've never lost a single self-defense case that I've taken to trial. Every client that I've had who has had a self-defense case, who has gone to trial, has been found not guilty. And so I feel very comfortable with self-defense laws. And what it comes down to is reasonableness of the belief. So if you think somebody has a weapon and is going to harm you, your belief about that you have to have the subjective belief, you have to actually think it, but it must be objectively reasonable to other people. And so that's where we see, I think, a disconnect between what law enforcement is and people who support them are saying versus what other members of the public might be seeing, because there's an argument that their belief that somebody might have a gun is not objectively reasonable once you look at all the circumstances. And obviously you do have to look at whether or not the officer is in a high stress situation, but I also feel like officers are trained to deal with those high stress situations. And we don't see the same types of reactions for purposes of self-defense with officers who have military training versus officers who don't. Officers with military training don't always, jump to lethal force immediately when they feel threatened. They try to de-escalate, they assess the situation a little bit differently. And I think we need to be very careful about the line of what's reasonable or not for law enforcement, because sometimes it tends to feel like police have a greater right to self-defense than other people. And so again, it comes down to the reasonableness of the officer in general, and that's often what's being looked at in these situations.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yes.
Kylan, you wanted to get in on this?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I actually want to jump into Robert's point, because there are definitely, times when, use of force and even deadly use of force is completely warranted and completely justified. So this is coming from someone who's had family members, who have been killed due to gun violence and due to crime. So I actually am very sympathetic to, a more law and order perspective and making sure that, there are dangerous criminals out there, and there always will be, and there's always going to be a need, for effective law enforcement in those situations. But when it comes to, the deadly force in other cases, I think we need to, really look at the reasons why an officer will be taking this force. And I think a lot of that, goes to training. You brought up something about a lot of officers that have military training are actually less prone to use deadly force so fast. And the reason why is because in the military, there's actually very strict protocols of rules of engagement. With rules of engagement, you cannot fire until fired upon, or else you get court-martialed and you get dishonorably discharged. And also, when we look at the use of tear gas that we're seeing on the American streets, there's actually rules of engagement in war, in battle, that tear gas can't be used on the battlefield. And so I think there's a really big disconnect where we have a very regimented military life, and it's actually more of a Wild West scenario when it comes to policing in the homeland. And so I think that's something that really needs to be looked at and discussed in a lot of detail going forward when we're talking about ways to reform law enforcement, use of force, tactics, escalation, de-escalation, and the like. And so I just want to just piggyback on that. But Robert, you definitely, had a good point, and I do completely understand where you're coming from as it relates to there are criminals out there, and things need to be looked at on a deeper level before we make snap judgments on what the officer did. A lot of the times after the fact, facts do come out, but I do strongly believe that facts need to come out and that evidence should not be suppressed. There should be clear transparency, in body cam footage to enable all the facts to come out and that they can't be manipulated. And so, a lot to unpack there, but I just wanted to share that point.
Amen to that.
And that's a great point you make too. And what we all got to realize is, a lot of these cases do get judged in the court of public opinion before all the facts do come out, and that's a real problem that we face. But I want to get to Jake real quickly. He had one thing to say on this topic, and then we're going to move on to the next topic.
I think that it's totally valuable to look at both sides of it with every single case. And the problem that I have mostly with what we're discussing here is the training that leads them to be violent is all about self-protection and cranking up the stress of the job. And I mean, if the job requires that level of stress, we've got systemic issues left and right that we need dealing with. And to our later point of discussion, defunding the police, let's put a little bit of that funding and a whole lot more of other funding into the society at large and treating the issues that the police are supposed to go deal with.
Yep.
Make sure their training is a little bit more focused on de-escalation and non-violence.
Right. Okay, great. I want to get actually Vlad in real quick on this topic, and then we're moving on.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, of course, man.
It's funny. Some of the points that I wanted to make, Jake, you actually kind of covered. I'm gonna also throw my hat into the agree with Robert pile. I think there are definitely situations where deadly force is necessary, and it's justified. I think there are a lot of situations, unfortunately, where deadly force is the first option, before de-escalation, before non-lethal force. And I think that's kind of the problem that we have with police right now. And a lot of it, I believe, does come down to training. Police officers aren't really, like, their first instinct when they foresee a threat isn't necessarily to de-escalate the situation. It's to pull out a gun and to start shooting. I mean, even in a situation where you have somebody lunging at you with a knife, that's not necessarily a deadly situation. Like, that person isn't, unless they're able to get really, really close to you, odds are they're not going to be able to kill you or probably even cause a great deal of bodily harm. That said, the first response is to pull out guns and to start shooting. So I think one of the biggest problems, and I think we're going to touch on this in when we get to police reform, is that's what we need to focus on. And the fact that in a lot of states and a lot of cities, you need more hours of training to become a hairstylist than a police officer. I think that
twice as much.
Yeah, in a lot of states, exactly, twice as much. I think that really contributes to the problem that we're seeing right now, where police are just trigger happy, and they see they see their gun as their only tool in a situation, not their taser, not their pepper spray, not even their voice, and their training to de-escalate.
All great points. Thanks for jumping in, Vlad. Appreciate it. We're gonna move on to the next topic of the night here, and that topic is, and I know this is going to be a topic where we have some disagreements. So I want to start this one off with Tyler, because you haven't gotten in yet, and you're sitting there quietly, and it's pissing me off. So, what are your thoughts on the protest as a whole? And to clarify, the protest as a result of George Floyd's killing. I figure that goes without saying, but
yeah, the protests by itself, there's nothing wrong with people coming together and protesting what is going on. I mean, we've seen it time and time again that this continues, and people need to get their word out, what they want to have changed. They want to have everybody know that this needs to stop. It's happening more often than not, I should say. There is some element of people out there that just want to take advantage of this and cause anarchy, essentially, and people lump them in with the protesters. There are people out there that are really just out there just saying, hey, listen to us. We have problems. We need to fix them. They don't want to go out there and burn businesses down, break windows, loot, and go crazy and basically make it, hey, we're just going to tear everything down. Some people might feel that way, but they wouldn't do that because they know that it's a big part of their community, and it would do more harm than it would help their cause. But there are people out there that don't care about that, and so they will go out there and throw a rock and get everybody going. And that's the people that you see on the news, unfortunately, and not the peaceful, we're just demonstrating, just saying, hey, listen.
So to be clear, then, you're condemning the violent and destructive protesters while at the same time recognizing the people that come out peacefully and make their voices heard. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, definitely, for sure. And I definitely agree with the protest 100%.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I want to go next to Charles. Same question to you. Just give us your overall thoughts on the protests and how you feel like they've gone.
I'm really with the protesters. I'm not with the looters and other people that's coming out to cause havoc, because there are some people that I have seen, because I've watched most of it, and they really was instigating the situations with the police quite a few times, And then, of course, our president, he instigated it more with the fencing and all that other stuff that's going on. So, I was listening to the mayor of Seattle today. One of their police departments was evacuated, and she said that's okay. She said that they have street festivals all the time. That the chief of the police had already been in the boarded up precinct. There's nobody's raising hell. They're feeding people. They're doing all these things. It's a 4-block area. It's well contained. Sometimes you got to just let people do what they need to do without causing a havoc. But once you get those other people in, then it escalates to a situation where it's unnecessary.
And Charles, just to clarify, by those other people, what do you mean
The
specifically?
people, the instigators, the looters, the people that just want to raise hell, because not everybody is there for the same reason. And it's been that way from the time I first saw the riots in '64 until now. So
to be clear, you think there are certain bad actors outside of maybe the Black Lives Matter movement that might have come in to instigate to maybe make their movement not look as great. Is that what you're saying?
for sure,
Okay.
but not just make them look great. Some of them are just taking the opportunity to get something for nothing.
Right.
So I just, the ones that are there for the cause are being affected by those there for personal gain or for destruction.
It only
Good point.
takes 1% of the people that are there to create 100% of the havoc.
Sure.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Like to take it over to Kylan first, and then I want to go to Jake next. Go ahead, Kylan.
So, when we're talking about the protests and we're talking about instigators and we're talking about people escalating and things like that, I want to really preface that there's two sides to that story of escalation. And so what has troubled me tremendously is over the past weeks, I have seen some gross examples of escalation on behalf of the police. I've seen police that have ran protesters with themselves. I have seen footage of police pulling down peaceful protesters' masks and spraying them with pepper spray. I have seen police beating unarmed protesters in the legs with batons and cracking them over the head. I have seen police say on tape, light people up who were standing on their porches recording, and they are getting lit up with rubber bullets. I have seen police to the point to abuse the media and specifically aim rubber bullets and shoot at them and shoot pepper rounds at them for them filming. I have seen police destroying water and destroying milk and destroying medical supplies for peaceful protesters. And also the most egregious thing that I've seen is the use of the National Guard and the use of military on horseback using flashbangs and smoke grenades to clear out journalists in Washington, D.C. for a photo op, and for the Attorney General to come out and say and lie and say that there were violent protesters when there's multiple members of the media saying that these were peaceful protesters the whole day, when you actually have clergy and people of the flock who were part of these peaceful protests saying that there was not a violent protest in sight, that type of instigation and escalation, I think, is reprehensible. And so, I definitely want to recognize that there are bad actors in some of these protesters who are smashing things and looting and violence, because also there have been police officers that have been seriously hurt and killed. And I mourn for their families and I feel for them, and I don't condone any type of violence or unnecessary loss of life. But if we're going to talk about escalation and we're going to talk about violence, I want to make sure that we know that there have been multiple instances caught on tape of law enforcement escalating things to the point of injuring peaceful protesters, as well as using flashbangs and smoke rounds and rubber bullets, rupturing people's eyes to the point where they lose vision and have lost eyes. And I think, we're seeing cops now being held responsible quickly, the most quickly I've ever seen in my lifetime. Whether it's the officers fired in Atlanta and being held responsible for dragging people out of their car, to members of the LAPD being taken and put on desk duty, and thank God for film. Thank God for film, because without it, it's just going to be like, he said, she said, and the system is built right now to take the word of the officer. And thank goodness for film. And so that's the point that I wanted to make on that.
Great point. Great point. Thank you, man. Want to take it over to Jake real quickly on this. Go ahead, Jake, and unmute yourself.
Talking about looters, rioters, and protesters as three distinct things, I think is really important, because we have three distinct groups of people out there. And I think that looters are a really interesting thing, because it's not like a one-time thing. It doesn't just pop up. It's a reaction of a society that doesn't have enough. If society had enough, that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't have people snagging that one opportunity to get ahead. So I just want to say that I think looters are vilified a lot because, well, for one, the moneyed hand owns the media. So that's just not even the point. But more importantly, I think where they're vilified so heavily, I would give them a little bit more room. I don't think they should be burning things down or destroying, but I also totally understand the rage. And if there's legitimate protesters rather than like provocateurs starting a fire, well, I've got nothing to say about it. Provocateurs, that's different. Those are rioters. That's a problem. But as far as protesters, or not protesters, looters go, I think that there's probably some pretty important examples in history of looting infusing the lowest part of the bottom class with value and monetary equipment, like a camera that they might never have gotten, and the turnaround of the bottom getting an influx of wealth is usually just greater social wealth. So I think there's looters like out there just getting one over, but I think that they wouldn't be doing that if society was structured so that there wasn't such a disparity in wealth. Tax the rich. Tax the rich.
And it goes to a point that I've been making, right? I've been seeing a lot of friends of mine making post after post after post about the destruction that these rioters and looters are causing and stuff like that, and not one mention of George Floyd. I don't think anyone here is condoning destruction of private property, but when you're making the point of talking about destruction of private property over life itself, that's where I think the issue comes in for a lot of us is we want to have a conversation centered around, hey, this is a response to this, we don't think this is okay, rather than, oh, those looters and rioters are dirtbags and so on and so forth. So I want to go over to Hannah for the next point here. Go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, well, I just want to reply to what you said, that I think it's I think it's definitely the case that we should look at that bigger perspective, that everybody should be looking at that big perspective of why looters and rioters are doing what they're doing. and what it speaks to systemically about what our people need. I wanted to speak to the issue of excessive force by police on civilians, and that I believe that there are ways that police can be trained to see and evaluate which groups are which groups. Like, do protesters behave significantly differently than looters? And what the message might be the same for each group. Looters might be looting because they have a similar message as more peaceful protesters. But for the variety of reasons that people will be protesting or looting or rioting, cops can also be conscious of that in their steps of engagement, and
Totally.
and make their actions be addressed specifically to those groups, so that they're not just lumping everybody into one category or treating everybody with the most excessive force that they can. If you get a blanket, yeah, do this to everybody when you go and find them on the street, then your individuation across many areas in life is usually the way to go. And if you can take a situation and see what it is, what people are saying, what they're doing, what they're asking of the cops, how they're pleading, where their intention is, then there should be decisions made in that moment to address action unique to that group. And
So-
I think that is significantly what I'm seeing that's missing from the really heavy excessive force type responses in the videos and stories I've been reading the past few weeks.
What we're seeing with the excessive force, though, is that they're treating everybody the same just because they're yelling or just because they're in a group. And as you're saying, they shouldn't be doing that. They should be going after the people that are destroying property. There was a business owner, a Black business owner down in LA, that they were trying to get the cops' attention to come and help protect their business because they were getting vandalized. But then they were the ones that got arrested because there was a news lady that was there covering them, and she was yelling and screaming, pointing toward the people who were actually vandalizing. And then they went after the business owners because the business owners were staying there instead of going after the people that were running away. They're just basically taking everybody, and they're mostly going after the people of color right now. And it's unfortunate. It's perpetuating the stereotype that all cops are just going to go after the people of color. There is some restraint for some cops too, when you have people in their face yelling and screaming at them, and I applaud those kind of people. But unfortunately, that's a minority right now, and that's just based on what everybody's seeing across the country. And it's unfortunate. It shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, good point. I'd like to get to Vlad real quick. Then I've got a Facebook question for Kylan, and then I want to get to Greg real quick after that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So, Tyler, I just wanted to address one of the comments that you made, about the cops treating basically the groups of protesters the same. I don't know if I necessarily agree with you on that, man. I remember reading the story. I just pulled it up to refresh myself on it. It's a video out of believe Oregon, where it shows an officer in full uniform coming to a group of armed Proud Boys who were at the protest and telling them, hey guys, can you discreetly stay either inside or inside your cars? We're about to start like an enforcement action and we don't want to play favorites. You have situations like that, and then you also have situations where you have police officers respond to protests again where there's armed people showing up at state houses, like was it in Michigan as well, I believe?
Yes.
Right, it was in Michigan.
Yes.
and there was no sort of escalation. You have videos. There's one that I saw where there was a protester who was in the face of a police officer. The protester, this was from some time back. This has nothing to do with this most recent string of protests, but the protester had his hand on on his weapon, which was on a holster on his hip. And the only thing the officer did was stick his hand out to say like, whoa, hey buddy, like let's slow this situation down. So to say that, they treat all protesters the same, I don't think that's necessarily accurate, man. I think there's certain groups that they don't treat the same. And we've seen that here.
Well, but those aren't protesters.
There's a difference.
I know. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And then we can move on.
Understood. Yeah. Let's go to Kylan.
There's a question for me.
There was a question. Pulling it up right now. So this question comes in from Matthew Guest from Facebook. Thank you for your question, Matthew. The question is, when you say you've witnessed these actions by police, pulling, pepper spraying, destroying of medical equipment, etc., was this witnessed in person or from a media outlet? If it is media, would you care to share what it was?
So no, I did not witness this in person. Again, Matthew, thank you for your question. But these are from not just one media outlet, but from various media outlets, as well as from firsthand accounts from actual witnesses that have their cell phone footage. So these are not only media firsthand accounts, but firsthand accounts for people who are there. And so, I'm not going to assume the point that you're trying to make, but there's a time where we can have legitimate criticisms of the media, but I think when there's actual real life footage of protesters, getting the shit beat out of them and getting pepper sprayed, and we can see it with our own eyes, I think gaslighting is not going to be an effective way to try to have a counter argument. And so, I would ask the same question to you, Matt. Were you there in person to say that that didn't happen? And so, we can definitely, go back and forth, and I could phrase the same question to you. Were you there to refute the firsthand eyewitness accounts of, people who've seen people gotten pepper sprayed or been pepper sprayed or witnessed people being pepper sprayed? And so, that's a little bit, in my opinion, a nonsensical point. And so there has to come a point where there has to be a certain shared sense of reality, where we at some point have to accept what we see with our own eyes and hear with our own ears, without making everything about a media boogeyman or some vast global conspiracy cabal or George Soros funded conspiracy. Like, there has to be a shared set of reality that we can see with our own eyes and hear with our own ears. So that will be my answer to that question. It may not have been the answer you were looking for, but I definitely wanted to address it. And again, thank you for your interest and your question.
I love that. I would love to be a George Soros paid protester. Just so you guys know, we have a little internal chat, and that's what Amanda said. I thought that was kind of funny. So
I have student loans. What can I say?
Hey, I get it. Want to go quickly to Greg next. Greg, what are your thoughts on the protest and the current civil unrest that we're seeing right now?
So these have been going on about 2 weeks, correct? Give or take, maybe 3. So we've gone
about
from
2-3 weeks. Yeah, that's about right.
So forgive me, because I'm old and sometimes I'm stupid, but we have the death, we have the charges, we have the protests, and part of the protest was BLM. Then it went to rioting of just damage, which immediately turned to looting with the opportunists. And then I have no idea where Antifa comes into this, or a group like that, because they seem to be stirring up the stuff in front of the protesters, using them as cover. So I'm confused on that. Charles also mentioned something about Trump in Seattle. So Trump can't do anything. Actually, he can, but that's a last resort, because the last thing you want is the first airborne on the ground trying to work with citizens. Somebody's going to get hurt quick. But in Seattle, and if I'm wrong, correct me, guys, but Seattle, they took over 6 square blocks and barricaded it off. And I went to bed. I woke up
Chat
at
zone.
midnight and came back on and found out that the city council person had let them in to City Hall for a protest, which is out of the blues, which leads me to this point. The police are at the mercy of the politicians, the mayor or whoever. They're getting their marching orders from those people, from the politicians. So when in Seattle, the police were told to abandon the precinct and board it up. They even had a shredding party. And I don't think the police were involved in this retreat. This was something the politicians and the mayor arranged and negotiated. So to blame the police or we evacuated or we let them have that's totally wrong. I think the politicians let them have that. And unfortunately, them taking 6 blocks, maybe going to 12 and whatnot, it's going to come to an end. It's not going to end well when this comes to a head. So tying that all up into one big story, I'm sorry it took so long, but I just don't know who's who anymore as far as protesters, opportunists, BLM, and Antifa.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the comments that we just received on the page from William Adams says, in Las Vegas, there were ads all over Craigslist for paid protesting at $22 an hour. I don't know if that's true. I can't
what
independently
city?
confirm that.
'Cause I
Las
saw
Vegas.
Yeah, that's correct. I saw
Yeah.
the post on Las Vegas. Now, just to be clear, I have friends of mine that are on Facebook that are part of Antifa. And they don't talk to me much. But one of the comments that happened in Santa Rosa's protests is the tear gas wasn't so bad until about the 7th or 8th can. So,
Wow.
you know, they were involved. But they're not going to tell me what's going on. And they're all friends of mine. They do what they want to do. So remember I said earlier about the libertarian and progressive side of me. There are friends of mine that are not conservative. I have a couple.
So I'm curious, Greg, you say you have some friends who are Antifa. Are you saying they're that, or do they say they're that?
They say that.
Are they card-carrying members of Antifa?
That I
Or
don't
they
know.
just believe in what Antifa stands for.
They go to the protests. I've seen the cell phone video. They're there, but are they a card carrying member? I couldn't tell you.
Well, I was playing. You can't be. There's no such thing as an organization.
Right.
It's an ideology.
I'm
sorry.
okay. After Trump just named them a terrorist organization. I love it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but-
It's smart.
But the
good move on
problem
his
with
part.
that is
It's a loose knit group. They all have their own little cells. So there's no national president for Antifa that I'm aware of. I'm just saying that they've embedded and used the protests, legitimate protests, as cover to do whatever they want to do.
And I
Well,
apologize for laughing at that. I think the point Jake is trying to make is that Antifa is not necessarily a group, more that they are an ideology. So
Yeah,
I think that was the point.
anywhere, like if there's a neo-Nazi rally and I show up and huck a brick, I'm Antifa just for doing that. I don't have to think about a group or care about an organization. It's just short for anti-fascist. You deal with fascists, you're Antifa, period. That's it.
Well, I'm anti-fascist, but I'm definitely not
I believe it.
Antifa.
But I think just by definition you are. I mean, it's if you look up the roots of the group, and I mean maybe I'm mistaken. It's literally just a response to fascism. It's not like an organized group. And I could be mistaken. I don't know for sure, but that's my understanding of it.
but there are people that feel like the response to fascism is communism. And that's what
Are
some
there people that
think
actually think that?
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that think
Can
that.
you explain that?
Well,
Yeah,
because people think that Antifa are funded by people like George Soros, and they're being funded by the Democratic Party and craziness. This is like fringe conspiracy stuff, but people think that is going on, and that they're using this as a way to get more control of what's being said in the media or what the police are doing, getting rid of the police, frankly, and then just going into a police state with their militia, essentially.
Right.
It's fringe, I'm sorry, but there are people out there that believe that, and I have a lot of people that I know that think that.
Gotcha.
If I can jump on that part real quick,
Go ahead, Greg.
I agree with you, Tyler. The fringe is out there. I don't believe this, at least yet. The Democrats never let a crisis go to waste. So we started with, well, actually Republicans too, but the Democrats are doing a great job.
Okay. Politicians never do.
We have coronavirus. We lock everybody down. We throw people in jail. The barber in Michigan went to the state Supreme Court to finally win to keep his barbershop open from Whitmire. That's insane. But yet we got guys in protesters out the wazoo that are out in public. And that's just the protesters. That's not counting the looters, the rioters, anybody else. And they get away with it. So there's some not equal stuff going on there. But it seems to me, and this is a theory out there on the web, that the people in these democratic cities and states are keeping this ball rolling and trying to dump it onto Trump or the Republican Party and keep things stirred up until the election. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I have no opinion on that. It seems a little far out there. I don't think anybody could plan this good. I think just things are falling into place for them to stir the stuff up. So that's just my response on that.
Greg, really quickly, I can tell you as a Democrat, progressive, Democrats couldn't plan that good if if it was planned for them.
I totally agree.
It's like herding cats. They can't even formulate a coherent message, yet alone make a plan that good. But but you definitely.
I think they're taking the opportunity to keep it stirred up. There's right. I'm with you, but there is no way they're that smart to plan this up because it's going to take a long while to plan this, and everybody's going to have to fall into line. The protesters, BLM, Antifa, you name it, they're all going to have to play along, and that's just impossible.
And I wanted to get Robert in here as well because you haven't had a chance to jump in for a while. Not even just talking about just the protests, if you want to chime in on that, but like overall, when we're talking about, how do we move forward, from this and and have effective leadership on the state and the local level, and how to quell these protests. What are some of your thoughts, regarding that and about moving forward and about what's going on with people's behaviors?
Let's see. I think the main thing that we have that's wrong with our country right now is the tribalism, and we were talking about these fringe ideologies that both sides want to paint each other as. I think that's the number one problem that we have, where conservatives want to say that everybody on the left is Antifa, and then everybody on the left want to say everybody on the right is white supremacist. I think that painting everybody into this group to label them as such really does more harm than actually addressing the real issues, which is, obviously a Black man being killed by a police officer. I think the way that we go about doing it is stick with peaceful protest. I'm 100% for peaceful protest. I do support the calling out of the violent protests, because if we weren't to call out the violent protesters, then I don't think it wouldn't be put on the news. Now, my news feed has been mostly peaceful protests, so I hear some people saying that a lot of their news feed has been violent, but I haven't seen it, for one, and two, I think that we need to call out the violent protests, because it's obviously something that's, or not violent, but rioters, because it's something that shouldn't happen. But I believe in the peaceful protests, And just like I've said plenty of times here, I think that discussion and dialogue that we're having in this on this channel here is something that will definitely help, instead of, you know, villainizing everybody as Antifa or white supremacists.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
That's a very
So
good
I
question.
want to quickly get Greg and Charles in on this, and then I want to move on to the next topic here. Obviously, you guys are a little bit long in the tooth, a little bit older than the rest of us here.
Ouch.
And yeah, well, sorry, I mean, it's true. What do you want me to say?
Yeah,
You could be nice about it.
Come on. So I wanted to ask your opinion on this. How does this situation compare to the civil rights movement and to the situation with Rodney King in '92? Let's start with Charles, and then we'll go to Greg.
Okay. With the civil rights movement, it was more or less because of the mistreatment. In '68, after the Olympics, and John Carlos them raised their fist at everything, you know, it really showed the divide in America. And then to watch riots happen, and here in the Bay Area, you know, the monetary difference structure in America, it really focused on the haves and the have-nots. And that really kind of opened up a lot of people's eyes all through America, you know. And with the Rodney King situation, it was just anger, because everybody saw what happened, and they still got away. See, we had situation where the police did what they did today. I mean, this with George Floyd, and it was all on TV. The same thing with Rodney King. But after the trial, and I'm afraid that we may see that again after the trial, if they do not convict these officers, America could really be in a bad situation, because
Yeah.
you can't just keep telling us that what we're seeing, we're not seeing.
Right.
You know, and that's what's happened every time. You're going to tell us we're not seeing what we're seeing. You know, I was looking at some of the Facebook things, and you said you're getting this all from the media. Well, not all of it comes from the media, because we have people that we're friends with that are posting things to us, you know. So, you know, we hear a lot of it on the news. We see a lot of it on, you know, from hearsay in the newspaper. But then sometimes you might have that one-on-one with someone that lives in that area that's telling you this is what's going on.
Mhm.
You know, so as far as I'm concerned, the difference now is it's been going on so long that no one's going to give up. They're not going to accept just what you say, you know, as a okay, we're gonna let that go. It's not happening
Right.
now. I don't think this will be over until way after those guys go to jail, because there's going to be more things happen. Every day I've seen new videos where the cops are killing other kids, other people that hasn't been I don't know. You know, how do you wait 3 months to show the guy who got shot in the back, Aubrey? How do you wait 3 months to see that girl who
It's
got
3 months.
shot in her room? You know, that's so if it took 3 months to see that, what happened in the 3 months leading up to this all around America?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. I agree.
Yeah.
Greg, let's get your thoughts.
In '68, I was probably 10 years old, 11. So the background on me is I'm an Air Force brat. I followed my dad around in the Air Force for 21 years. So we lived on Air Force bases, and that's a whole different world and different community. We had no civil rights issues in the '60s into the 70s on Air Force bases. The discipline is so much so that it's not allowed. It doesn't
I'm an Air
matter
Force vet.
what somebody is. So we didn't have those issues. But in 68, the stuff I was seeing with the police and the rioters, not necessarily the protesters, reminded me of the 68 Democratic Convention and also Kent State. That was all over the news. You go into Rodney King, they tore that city up for weeks. And I don't think it's still back. So there has to be an end to, I'm not saying the end of the protests, but the destruction's got to come to an end or it's going to come to a head. And I saw videos that were, you change them to black and white and I could swear they were 1968. The batons to the knees, the heads, the whole night thing. It looked exactly the same thing. And I remember that from TV. Unfortunately, like I said, being on an Air Force Base civil rights movement, that was a non-issue on military bases. They did not put up with that crap.
And
Right.
that's just amazing to just hear that, like, from both of you guys, just being able to just say from 68 and from, you know, things like when I was either a kid or not born, just hearing that perspective firsthand is just, it's just amazing. I'm just like, I have the chills just listening to you guys. So thank you both for your takes on that.
I'm curious, Greg, do you know that it was not like there was not enough room for too strict to allow for those kind of abuses on the Air Force Base, or if it was such a different time that people weren't able to speak up about it?
I was in the Air Force at that time. I went in 74. So it was just not just awesome. It was more togetherness.
Right on.
But there were, you know, where the only discrimination was in the military is my dad was a non-commissioned officer. I could not date
Yep.
or go to dances with an officer's daughter.
Oh,
That's how strict it was.
Oh,
Okay. So if you, again, most of the schools and Air Force bases I lived on, they had their own school systems. So you had to know the name and rank of the girl you were chasing if you wanted to take her out or just go to the dance. It was that strict on that. That was horrendous. But the civil rights stuff, let's see, on Air Force bases, they used to have, correct me, Charles, but they used to have teen clubs.
Yes.
And you had to be at least 13 to 19 to go to these teen clubs. And I couldn't wait to turn 13. I was living at Edwards Air Force Base out in the desert. And
I was at Bill.
okay. So when I got to go to the teen club, guess what? It was all African Americans that were there on Friday and Saturday nights. And they would bring in live bands from LA and Southern California to play at the teen clubs every weekend. So again, race was an issue, never an issue at these clubs. I'm a poor little white boy. You couldn't get any whiter than me at 80 pounds. Okay. And I had a ball. So again, it's the military structure. They have no sense of humor about that stuff back then or even now.
thank you guys.
Thank you guys both for digging in on that.
No, it's really cool to hear that perspective, and
It
yeah,
really
I'm
is.
glad you guys came, and glad you guys got to share that with us tonight. So, I want to go to Vlad next, then to Amanda, and then I'd like to move into the next topic here. Go ahead, Vlad.
So first thing I'd like to say is, you know, Charles and Greg both, thank you for your service, and also thank you for the story that, you know, the stories that you guys just told of your experience, you know, through that time. Hearing that kind of helped put things in perspective for me, and it brought something up to the surface that I've noticed, especially amongst like the younger generation, is that, you know, there's this belief that, you know, the civil rights movement in some ways, and granted, I'm not generalizing, but there's a belief amongst certain people that, you know, the civil rights movement and everything happened so long ago. Like, there's this kind of thought that it was like, hey, you know, this was so long ago, it wasn't in our lifetime. But in reality, there are plenty of people around who lived through it, who experienced it. Like you can, you know, it's not that long ago where someone you meet on the street can go, you can ask them a question and they can literally tell you like, no, I was there, it didn't happen like that. So I think, you know, I think that's really kind of a problem, is that like we haven't, as a society, like we have not come as far as we think we have in time and also in progress, from, you know, from the 1960s and the 1970s. Like we're still fighting some of the same battles, you know, like you guys
Totally.
said, you know, like you guys said, you take some of these videos that you're seeing right now being filmed on people's cell phones, throw them in black and white, and you could have swore that they happened in in the 1960s or in the 1970s. So I think we really need to keep that perspective on, is that, you know, the fight that was started back then wasn't that long ago, and it is not over by a long shot, and we got to keep it going. So again, like thank you both so much for your stories and also for your service.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks, Vlad. Want to go to Amanda next?
Thanks. So Vlad mentioned videos, and earlier we were talking about, you know, these things we're seeing in the media. How do we know that these things are happening on the ground? And I think the best way to do that is to just take accounts from people who were actually on the ground. So in the Facebook comments, my friend Danny is commenting, and he's a legal observer for the National Lawyers Guild, and he works at a civil rights law firm.
Green hat.
He was one of the people who, you know, he goes to protests, he wears a neon green hat. They're a nationwide organization, so you can see them at all of these protests. And they are some of the people who are being targeted by the police. And, you know, when we are looking at things in the media, yeah, they might just be showing the looters, they might just be showing the rioters. But when you look at what people on the ground are filming, what they're seeing, and what you can see through their videos is just kind of indiscriminate targeting of people. It's not only going after the looters or only going after the rioters. It's just shooting into the crowd, regardless of who it is. Or in Danny's case, and you know, he's on the sidewalk in a place where an officer told him was safe to stand. They know he's with NLG. They know he's a legal observer. Somebody nowhere near him throws a water bottle high over the officers behind them, and an officer points a gun straight at Danny's head and shoots him with a pepper ball. And he goes down. And this is something I watched live because he was filming it live on his camera, on his cell phone, and broadcasting it to Facebook. And he's not the only person that this has happened to. And so, you know, I think we have to look at the fact that it's not just, you know, the media is showing us. We're in a time when we can live stream like we're doing now what's happening out there and immediately throw it online and see, you know, what's really happening. And I think that's something that is completely different now than what, you know, Charles and Greg lived through when they were our age. And I think we should throw it to Hannah now, and then I have one more point before we move on to the next topic.
I think that detail about what's different today versus previous years is spot on. There's a few differences that's happening now, and that's that we've got unlimited ability to show what's happening. People that are just in their neighborhood getting harassed by cops are able to clearly and easily show what's happening to them. There's a lot more recording available, a lot more sharing of content. And I think that type of content is just going to flood in more and more like we've never seen it before. Purely for the, it's not like it's been happening more. It's not like racism is getting worse. It's a long countrywide issue, like history long issue that now finally has enough cameras out there to show it in a big enough flood that people are having to face it. And I think there's ways that are different these days that are going, there's a clear understanding of how we can get at people that have the power to change these deep problems in our systems. And some of that I'm seeing through the protesters and for some of the intentions of the rioters are to get to the pocketbooks, get to where it hurts the different companies, to where corporations would rather choose the side of Black Lives Matter than to shut their doors and be just hold their financial ground or to stay out of it. But I'm seeing a lot more corporations choose the side of what's popular right now. And although that is not the reason to do it, that is a reason that people will do it. And if that is turning over more and more and enough, there is going to be enough people in lobbying for the government or at government that will be able to make a big enough impression because they don't want their finances to get fucked. They hurt.
Yeah, understood. Go ahead, Amanda, and then I want to get to Robert next.
So, Hannah, I thought you made a good point about corporations, and I wanted to talk about a concept called performative allyship. I know one of our viewers was hoping we would talk about this, and I feel like, you know, for people who don't know what that means, I think what it means to me is, in a sense, showing that you're an ally for the performance aspect of it, for the attention, for the accolades, but pretty much doing nothing else. And I feel like we see that with a lot of corporations, with the statements they're coming out with that don't necessarily match their practices, like with Starbucks saying they're pro Black Lives Matter, but preventing their workers from displaying on their, you know, work uniforms anything to do with that, while being totally okay with other movements being represented, like with, you know, Pride Month and things like that. We also see this with the police officers who are photographed kneeling or participating with the protesters, and then 5 minutes later are participating in the brutality against those protesters. And then the thing that I thought was kind of the thing that bothered me the most this past week was Blackout Tuesday, which got co-opted from amplifying melanated voices to utter silence on the internet with black squares that really detracted from the activism that takes place on platforms like Instagram, and was just a way for some people to say, hey, I believe that Black Lives Matter, but that's all you'll hear from me. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to donate. I'm not going to read about the issues or, you know, do any digging into my personal biases or behavior. And I changed my profile picture. It's good enough. And I feel like we can all do better. And especially when it comes to corporations, you know, we can vote with our dollar and, you know, make sure that they know that this is something we really care about, or whatever the issue is, in order to get them to make real changes, not just within their businesses, but also, like Hannah said, lobbying the government for change.
Right. All right, that's a good point. Robert, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I wanted to address a couple things. So first, the whole aspect of the media getting caught in the fire of the protests. Like I don't know if anyone's seen the video of the MSNBC reporter on the ground in the streets, and they're shooting smoke grenades by him. Or you have the other videos of media, or, you know, lawyers guilds in the lime
live
green hats.
broadcast in CNN.
Yeah, exactly. The problem I have with it is, I mean, the protests for the most part are peaceful, but like we had said earlier, we don't know the black and white. We don't know the nuance of what's actually happening. So a lot of times there may be something that's thrown over a police officer. There might be a police officer, you know, mounted on a horse, and the horse gets smacked in the face with a brick. So what happens is the officers have a decision to make where they have to fire tear gas, or they have to fire smoke, or they have to fire rubber bullets. Now, there's probably officers out there who don't do what they're supposed to within the 30-foot range, and they probably shoot people when they're supposed to be shooting them off the ground. But there's also instances of they're kind of in, I don't want to use war zone as a term, because it's definitely not a war zone, but they're in an area where action is occurring, where officers need to also be precautious of themselves and the buildings and the bystanders. So I do understand that sometimes people may get caught in the blind fire of rubber bullets and whatnot. But there's also the aspect of, they're in a situation reporting on the incident. The other thing I wanted to bring up was we had been talking about, like people showing their solidarity for the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think there's a problem with the mob that will rip anybody apart who has an opposing opinion. There's the soccer player from the LA Galaxy and his, oh, great. Now, please don't bark right now. So the wife had said something on Twitter in another language, and the Twitter mob had figured out what she had said. So they not only made him apologize and show his support for Black Lives Matter, but then they fired him from the soccer team for the incident. So what happens is, if you don't agree with the mob and everything that they stand for, you're kind of ripped to shreds. So I don't necessarily agree with the aspect that everybody has to show solidarity by, posting something on Facebook. You can say that, what happened to George Floyd was a terrible tragedy, but not have to go out there and show your unified support for Black Lives Matter. We've seen things.
What mob?
What do you mean? I gave you one incident. There's also an incident like where Sean King had falsely labeled somebody, a white guy, as being somebody who killed like a young Black girl. I don't remember where it was, but they ended up figuring out that it wasn't even a white guy that killed the girl. It was actually another Black individual. So
doxing and the social media mob with the keyboard warriors are totally a thing.
Okay. Keyboard warriors all the way, but mob.
It turns into a mob. It really does turn into a mob. I agree with Robert.
The vast majority are good people. I don't want you to think that I'm calling Black Lives Matter a mob of, pitchforks and bigots, because they're not. But I'm going after a certain group of people that will ruin people's lives. I mean, there's plenty of Facebook groups, and if I could bring up one more example of the guy in Tennessee who had burned down a courthouse. They had said he was a white supremacist and he had white supremacist tattoos on him. I ended up enhancing the video or the footage, and he had no white supremacist tattoos. I actually ended up messaging his wife. She said he had no white supremacist tattoos and that he wasn't even part of Patriot Prayer or Proud Boys. But everybody all over the media wanted to label him a white supremacist. And now his life's totally ruined. His wife is, like spreading or telling me everything, and I'm a nobody. I just asked because I wanted to figure out the truth. And now she's getting death threats, and their lives are being ruined over this. So I think there's also a problem where we have to point out the bad people in whatever group it may be, whether we're pointing out the white supremacists and the Trump,
Okay. I got it.
Can I add to that, Robert?
Yeah, most certainly.
Just recently, I think it was UCLA, the professor of 39 years loses his job because he won't give Black people extra time for their finals. That's nobody died, but this guy I'm sure he has tenure, but he's done at that university after 39 years because of mob mentality. Now, nobody died, but it just ended his career.
The people's lives are ruined, and we don't even need to go down the line of the Paw Patrol, where New York Times wrote an article, but the Twitter sphere is a real thing, and it does start to bring up topics that New York Times want to talk about, even if it is something as stupid as a kid's cartoon TV show.
Sorry, can I address one quick point? Actually, Greg, would you mind linking us the article of the incident you just brought up there? Because that's the first I'm hearing of it, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm not as fast as you guys with Google, so give me a second.
I know you're not.
It's all right.
Greg,
I think Vlad has the link for us.
Vlad nailed it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, speak to it, Greg.
You got it? Okay.
Can I respond?
Yeah, we got it. Let's go to Amanda real quick. I know she wanted to get in.
So I wanted to kind of first go back to what Robert said about the journalists. So, I think the difference between, an officer something's thrown and what they're doing with the journalists is that they're just kind of targeting people indiscriminately in response to things that a lot of times aren't actually going to hurt them because they're in body armor and riot gear. Okay. And obviously bricks are a separate issue. And I think there are some videos out there showing police setting up the bricks in advance, which if true is problematic, obviously. But when it comes to journalists, it's obvious who the journalists are. They have giant cameras, they have credentials, they have microphones in their hands. And you see so many images and videos of police putting their hands into the camera and knocking somebody down, and then, or tackling someone who's giving an interview, shooting at people live, CNN or whoever, it wasn't CNN, I think it was a local organization. There was, a news anchor giving a report on a microphone, and she's like, oh my God, they're shooting at us. And you see the officer with the gun pointed straight at them. This isn't a situation where they just happen to be in an area with tear gas and they're kind of putting themselves on the line, like being in the middle of a hurricane. They're being targeted, just like medics are being targeted, just by like legal observers with the green hats are being targeted. And so I just wanted to make that distinction. And I agree with you guys about the Twitter mobs. For my law firm, we thought about getting a Twitter, and I was like, no. Twitter trolls are a problem. We say one thing someone on Twitter doesn't like, and it's gonna blow up. I'm not a fan of doxing, and my comment about performative allyship, I hope it wasn't taken as you should put up something on Facebook and show your solidarity. I think solidarity means nothing if you're not going to actually act on it in some meaningful way, because I know so many people who put up a black square, and I'm like, that's all you're going to do. And you're going to be able to pat yourself on the back and say, I'm not racist, when you haven't actually done anything else. And obviously that doesn't apply to the people in this group, because this is a form of activism talking about these issues. But I just wanted to make that clear. I wasn't saying you needed to put something on Facebook or announce your position to the world. I actually think announcing it to the world is performative if you're not going to actually do anything else.
Yeah, let me just say, I don't do Twitter, so I don't know about the mobs. That's all I'm saying. That's why I was asking. I don't
I'm
have
with
any
you,
idea
Charles.
about that.
You guys are probably better off for it.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next topic, guys. This is actually the last topic of the night, and then I want to move into a nice fun topic to end the night on. In the wake of the George Floyd murder, there's been a lot of talk about should the police be reformed or defunded, or even so much as abolished. So the first person I want to go to this one is Jake. Do you think the police departments of this country can be reformed, or do you think they should be defunded or abolished?
Well, so like, I love words, and I think defunded is a really tricky one. That's
Right.
I mean, we need to reduce their funding drastically, but we also need to repurpose that money so that it's doing the things that police are being tasked with right now that they should never be tasked with. Their crime response and crisis response, but not social workers, not a plethora of other things that they get spent, their time gets spent on. And like these people should be looked at as heroes. They should go be heroes. They should deal with crime, not a ton of other things. And if you look at city budgets all over the country, the budget for the police massively dwarfs the budget for most other social services involved. I'd like to see, this is a two-pronged thing. I'd like to see some pretty intense reform that starts with a lot of funding being redirected, but also includes like, let's do some study in criminology for the officers. Let's make sure that these people are people who will go the extra mile for this job. What is it, 26 or 28 weeks right now training for cops? I'd like to see that be a 4-year study. Then we know these people are not just physically capable, but smart enough to do their job in a good way. They've gone through serious training. And at the same time, if we can reform the police that much, we need to be looking at the society that has coexisted simultaneously with a more and more brutal police force, because police are afraid, and they have been encouraged to be afraid by violence back and forth with this society. And funding going into society, into the lower economics, will definitely alleviate some of that. But the police reform can't be just police reform, or the already high level of antagonism between the police and the population will spark anew.
Right. And that's where I think a lot of it gets lost with the defund the police movement. Because defund in
Dumb wording.
itself means cease to fund. So a lot of people just jumped to assume that meant abolish the police department and go to like community policing or different, community militias, if you want to call it that, or something to that effect. And I think
And I
that was
think
what a
that-
lot of people had took issue with. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's really just like media flair too. Like I think they caught on to the idea that funding was being reduced for police and called it defunding, and from there on we had social panic and people responding not inaccurately to the word, because it does mean that.
Do you think the messaging could have been better?
Totally. I mean, I think we've when I was in school, my teachers said if you screw up a single thing in your reporting, even a letter somewhere, you lose a letter grade. I don't think we hold our media to anywhere near that kind of standard anymore, and their bottom line is sales.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so
Clickbait.
alarmism is a hugely valuable thing, just like sex or drugs. It's gonna drive sales, so that
If
they
it-
really capitalize on that and defund the police. Man, how many people are having conversations like we're having right now because somebody smart said, oh, use this word and it'll drive.
It's intentionally inflammatory. That's what I think.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. There was better
Um,
wording, they chose not to use it.
If
Right.
it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go to Kylan. You had some thoughts on this one real quick. Go ahead, bud.
Yeah, definitely. And so, definitely semantics and words matter. So just for the record, I absolutely unequivocally am against any sort of abolition of the police. So that's a non-starter. A lot of people,
Agreed.
a lot of people that I marched with, a lot of younger folks. I was at a march this past Saturday. They're talking about abolish the police and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I just sat back quiet. I'm like, no, I can't go there. But there does need to be serious reform, and some reforms that I've been thinking about that I think need to happen, that should happen, are very concrete and are very to the point of how to change the behavior of police, where we will have less incidents of brutality. And first and foremost, there needs to be an end to qualified immunity, point blank, period, number one. Number two, all settlements need to come from the police pension funds. You go and whoop somebody's ass, you go and kill somebody or do whatever you need to do to violate somebody's rights, and you get sued, that comes out of the police pension fund. That comes out of the officer's personal liability. Number three, just like doctors and lawyers and other civil servants need to carry liability insurance or some sort of malpractice insurance, police officers need to carry that same insurance so they can have personal responsibility just like the rest of us civilians. Number four, when we're talking about conflict of interest, how can you expect for there to be fair justice when we're talking about police, when police unions can funnel campaign contributions into the races for district attorneys? That's nonsensical. When we talk about campaign finance reform for government, that same campaign finance law should apply to police unions, because there's not going to be any sort of real justice when you know that you have a hand-picked, hand-funded district attorney. And lastly, and I think Amanda, I don't know if it was Amanda or somebody else alluded to, we have more training to be a hairdresser or a barber than we do to be a police officer. And so I think we need to get into the human aspect, because again, police officers are also people. They have emotions, they have minds, they have feelings, they have anxieties, they have insecurities. I believe there needs to be a holistic approach to officer health, where that means to be, mandatory quarterly psych evaluations. Just like most corporations have like an EAP, employee assistance program, where you can have complimentary to talk about what's on your mind or get some sort of mental health. Mental health needs to be there for officers as well. I think officers need to have advanced education, whether that be a bachelor degree or a master's degree. If you look at some of our contemporaries overseas in Europe, teachers and police officers both have advanced level degrees, and they also get advanced level salaries, and not just by, you know, piling up overtime or maneuvering the system, but they actually get paid a wage for the professionalism and for the expertise of their role. And so those are some things that, you know, that I think would lead to serious reform without having to defund, but definitely we need to reprioritize funding mechanism. I'm not going to say defund, but reprioritize funding, you know, because just like we have a military industrial complex with our government, we have a military and police industrial complex with local police forces where they have these exorbitantly bloated budgets. One last thing, I also think that we need to absolutely end providing surplus military equipment to police forces. Police forces should not be rolling around in tanks filled to the brim with assault rifles at every interaction. More riot gear can you imagine with, because escalation leads to escalation. So when you're showing up in full riot gear with tanks, with heavy muscle equipment, you're going to automatically put people on edge. People are automatically, we talk about officer safety and officers fearing for their life. How the hell do you think a non-trained civilian will feel in fear for their life when you got cops busting out with riot gears and AK-47s and tanks? And, look at what they did to the protesters at Standing Rock. You had a militarized police force with tanks, and they actually brought out sound cannons. They brought out sound cannons and water cannons to the protesters in Standing Rock. And I don't want to digress, but there needs to be real reform. And I think the things that I outlined are very fair reforms, are very reasonable, and I think could really change behaviors, because best believe a cop is not going to whoop somebody's ass and go and break somebody's civil rights when they know it's going to come out of their pocketbook. Personal accountability.
Yeah, all great points, Kylan. Thank you for that. Want to go to Robert wanted to respond, and then Amanda, and then let's get into our last topic of the night. Go ahead.
All right, I know this is going to be weird coming from the right winger who defends police, but I'm actually pretty much going to agree with the other side here on this one, that I think that police reform is a thing that we need in our country. I guess the first thing I'll state is a thing I don't necessarily agree with is lowering the funding for police. I don't know if that's the best answer, because if we were to talk about somebody who does heart surgery, would you want the guy who had less funds for his tools or less funding for his training on learning how to do better heart surgery, or you want the guy that had the most funds and the most money for training? But I will agree, one of the notes I had written down was something that Jake had brought up, which was increasing the police academy from 6 months. He said 4 years. I wrote 3 years. Germany does like 2.5, and Germany, has very small, police misconduct. I don't really know too much about it, but a lot of the times people will use Germany as an example for how the police should be run. Kylan as well. I thought you brought up a great point, talking about how there needs to be accountability for the police. I think that's something that is a very good idea. My libertarianness, I also think about more of a privatizing the military. Why do I keep saying military? Sorry, we were talking about police here. Sorry. So everything I said, if I said military, I meant police. But privatizing the police, where, for instance, this whole George Floyd incident, if there was some kind of privatized security that was guarding over these stores, could have shown up. Most states, like we have Barbie Air security around here. I don't even know if they're allowed to carry firearms, but
they are with training.
They are with training.
Yeah.
Okay.
But majority of them don't.
So yeah, exactly. So for the most part, they're probably a lot less violent than police officers. I don't have the data, and that's just me talking off the cuff. I don't have data on that, but some things thing, yeah, right. Some things I do know though is that it's 4 times as cheaper than police officers, and they have half of the response time. So I think that getting, privatized security into areas is something that would be a good idea. Other thing that I think is that police chiefs should be elected. or they have to,
Mhm.
or they have
Here,
to
here.
be accountable to like some kind of commission of, I don't know, like a election board or something like that, where they have to be elected each year. Whereas,
And licensed.
yeah,
We do it with the county sheriff's departments out here.
Yep.
okay.
They're elected.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sheriff's
okay.
Let's,
Sure, so
Amanda, you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on several points that were made. So, you know, we talked about expanding training. I completely agree with that, but I disagree with the requirement for a degree, and only because there are a lot of police officers who already have degrees. It doesn't stop them from breaking the law. It doesn't stop them from violating people's rights. It doesn't make them better officers necessarily. And I also think a good example of this that a friend of mine brought up to me this week was the Stanford prison experiment. You had people at one of the best, universities in the country treat each other completely inhumanely once they got a little bit of power. I don't necessarily think a college degree is going to solve anything. I think it's, more about a rigorous licensing and training program that is more like what other countries do. I wanted to talk about something that Robert mentioned. He mentioned heart surgery. So yes, obviously we want someone who is trained for heart surgery to get all the funding and equipment that they need, but I don't want them doing brain surgery with that money. And that's what basically is happening with a lot of these police forces. Part of the argument behind defund, it should really be reallocate and reform. Police forces have been spread thin and are having to handle things that they're not actually trained in. They're having to work on, brain surgery when they're trained for heart surgery, or kidneys when they're trained for, literally anything else. They're not mental health professionals. They're not doctors. They're not crisis counselors. They're not, all of the things that they have been pushed into these roles that they're not properly trained for.
Not high school counselors.
I'm sorry?
They're not high school counselors.
They're not high school counselors. They don't know, they get like precious.
Just about as useful though.
I'm sorry?
I said just about as useful though.
Well, but here's the thing though, like part of the argument for reallocation, redistribution for defunding is not taking away money from what they should be doing or need to be doing that they're trained to be doing. It's not taking away the money that goes to the heart surgery. It's taking away the money that's going to social work, that's going to, things that they are not actually properly trained and qualified to do, yet we have thrust that role upon them because it's easy and convenient. And so the idea behind defund the police, again, it should be reallocate and reform, is you take that money and you put it towards, different areas of the community and different resources that are actually able to handle those things. And then the police can focus on the crime fighting. It doesn't take away from their ability to fight crime, or in most cases, show up well after the fact. That's how like 90% of policing goes. They don't always catch the bad guy in the middle of the act. They show up afterwards because the event has ended and somebody calls police. They're there to investigate, take statements, take pictures, and figure out what happened, see if they can arrest somebody. But
And to that point, actually, doesn't San Francisco have one of the better response times throughout the country too? Or
I don't know. But I also
I did read that. I thought that was interesting. It was like their average response time was like 5 minutes or something, but it is a fairly small, dense city. So
San Anselmo's is supposed to be 90 seconds.
The
I wonder
only
why.
thing that defunding is taking away from the cops is taking away the burden of having to take on tasks that they should not have the burden of taking on, and leave it to the experts.
that's a great point.
Just an example of this is, there are some police departments that have mental health experts. There are officers who have a lot more training on mental health. Some of you may have noticed a couple of episodes I had to dip out for a little bit. I had a client who had a severe mental health episode, and we worked with a social worker, and I was on the phone with 911, making sure we got the mental health unit from the police department to come out and make sure that the client was okay. And it worked out because that person had the type of training that, was required for the situation. But that's the exception to the rule. And it shouldn't have to be the police. It should be social workers, counselors, doctors, crisis management experts. So the police are not going to be hurting for, hey, we can't fight crime if you take away a fraction of our budget.
Can I-
And then
can I
I
jump-
wanted to, just the last point, I wanted to talk about Robert's suggestion about privatizing. My one concern of that comes from my own anecdotal experience with, my job as a public defender, where we have a lot of cases involving private security. Unless the laws were to change on this as a result of making that switch to a private law enforcement force, the problem is they're not bound by the Fourth Amendment. They're not bound by rules of engagement. They put people in chokeholds. I have a case right now where my guy got beat to a bloody pulp by private security who thought he was harassing someone when he was just, existing. And so there are very few ways to actually control what they do to make sure that they're not hurting people, and doing what we expect them to do, which is just stop shoplifters, basically. And so my concern, if we make the entire system private, is where are the checks and balances going to be on that? Because a private organization is not subject to the Constitution.
Can I just say
Yeah.
one thing before we move on right now? Can we get a round of applause for Amanda? That was fucking amazing. Like,
I took notes. I have notes.
well done.
You're allowed to have notes.
I
can
love it.
I want to throw in a point on Amanda.
Quickly,
Sam-
Greg, and then I need to get
yeah,
Hannah in.
San Francisco, I just read it somewhere. San Francisco just said that the police will not respond to non-crime calls. Today, I saw it somewhere
Yeah.
today.
And that's important, because police are there to deal with crime. They're not there to deal with social issues that have to do with someone who's homeless or a medical emergency. It really should be people who are
didn't-
trained to deal with those issues.
They didn't say who was going to respond to the non-crime calls,
Well,
though, so I don't
that's-
know. But
I mean-
I think that's a step in the right direction. Cops should handle the
It
crime.
absolutely is. It's a lot
So-
of this right now feels like repeal and replace with Obamacare. Kind of like the one of the city council persons up in Minneapolis was saying, abolish the police force, and we're going to do something, imaginative and great. And it's like, have a plan. Because then people think you just want to get rid of the police force. And while there are people who they believe that the movement has been co-opted to make it about reform, I think the majority of the conversation has been about reform. We just need to have actual plans to put that into place.
Good points. Good points. Real quickly to Hannah, then I want to get Robert and Vlad in real quick. Go ahead, Hannah.
Well, what I had to say is probably an exclamation point on what Amanda said, and that's that social sciences are really where it's at right now.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny that in university, the social sciences are almost treated like a why bother degree, when the response that comes up because of a significant lack of jobs that are available that pay well enough to be able to afford to go to school for the actual subject. So when we think of what resources are available in our communities, people that study psychology and philosophy and anthropology, sociology, there's social sciences that they're people that have studied these things, that have plenty to give on these subjects, but just need to have the jobs. We have an overabundant amount of resources being spent by police to cover bases, like has been discussed here, that were never part of their job description that should have to do. And so when we have an overload of resources in an area that it's too much for that category, it's basically compensating for a lack of skills and find like specific subject matters that really would be beneficial to utilize and capitalize on, but they're just not trained to do it. So I
what's
think
interesting,
it's,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, I
Sorry.
think it's important to keep in mind that, like, yes, I don't think that a university degree is needed for police, but there needs to be at least training involved to be conscious of the different type of social support resources that are available, and to be encouraged to call on them, because that will make all of this work easier for them. I think the collective support in that way will really help be able to heal our system. And maybe that's just project managing, getting it in there and legal reform, but I really think that we have the people and resources available to help with this, like just itching to get in there. They just need the opportunities.
And it's interesting to that same point that you were making. It's a friend of mine posted a picture of a tank in Santa Rosa. Like they actually they don't have as much training, but they have tanks in Santa
They also-
Rosa. Like just
Yeah,
think about that.
Petaluma too.
In Petaluma, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems ridiculous that cities as small as them would actually need something like that, like actual riot gear.
We have one in Oakley and the population's 22,000.
They've
In
got something
Oakley?
like it set up in Centerville too, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no
It-
reason for them to have
It
it.
just
They
sits
have
there
it.
in the parking lot.
It seems like nonsense to me. But I want to get Vlad in real quick, then Robert, and then get to our last topic of the night. Go ahead, Vlad.
Yeah, so I think, I really appreciate the fact that the defunding the police was kind of addressed and how that's a misnomer. I will say that I think the police is woefully overfunded, and
Oh yeah.
seeing those photos like from Petaluma and Santa Rosa with the military vehicles, and you see videos of people of an APC rolling down the street of a suburban town with the words police written on the side of it. Like what the, like it's it's suburban America. It's not like Baghdad. So I think that's definitely necessary. People are praising like Los Angeles for cutting, was it 150 million out of their police budget, and they're saying that's a big deal. It sounds like a huge number, but when you take into consideration the fact that the LAPD annual budget is like last year was $3.1 billion.
That was the sheriff. The city is like
Was
1
it?
billion, but still.
Oh, yeah, so-
LAPD budget was 1.81 billion,
Oh, there you go.
or
Okay,
1.89. Sorry,
Thank you for the correction.
1.189. Jesus.
Thank you for the correction. I
helping.
do apologize. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a big number. In reality, there's still plenty of money to do what they have to do in terms of investigations and response to violent crime and response to actual crime. What they really need to stop doing is relying on police forces to be social workers, drug counselors, and any number of other things that they're not prepared for. Like 888 hours of training in the state of California to be a cop is kind of to me it's a joke. It's laughable. Like you can't possibly learn everything you need to learn to be a good officer in that amount of time. And which kind of brings me to my next point, that police forces have very little training when it comes to actual de-escalation. I just pulled up a list to see states where it's mandated, and it boggles my mind, because a lot of these states, once you actually become a uniformed officer, will require 2 hours of de-escalation training every 2 years, or 3 hours every 3 years. But at the same time, they require you to take 60 hours of firearms training. So what does that tell the officer? Like, what is the priority? Is it de-escalation, or is it learning how to fire a weapon and empty your 12-round mag in 3 seconds? Like, so I think that's really what we need to have happen, is like there has to be a shift in the mentality of policing, that they're there to actually protect people, to actually serve the community.
It's not us versus
instead
them.
of exactly, it's not us versus them. It has to be a mentality that we're all kind of in it together in order for this kind of progress to be made. That's all I had to say. Robert, I yield my time to you.
And actually, I'm sorry, real quick. I want to get Charles has had his hand up for a long time. I just realized that. I want to get him in real quick, and then Robert, we'll give you the last word.
Thank you. Hey, I also think that money needs to be divided up a little bit more. Let me give you a little background. I went to school to be a drug counselor, but I'm not going to do 1,600 hours of training to make $50,000 a year. So, that has to be a big difference in what you do, unless you get with someone that's, I don't know, want to just throw some money at you. You're not going to make over $60,000 a year. after 2 years of school, and then they wanted me to do 1,600 hours of training. No, so, but that's what they need to do with the money. They need to send the money to different areas. I work at the VA hospital. I'm the stationary engineer, but I also work with the police officers, and we have mental health people. I work nights. We have 2 mental health people on call at the hospital every night, and they then have others on call in case other things come up. They don't expect for the police or anyone to do it because they have to do it. And with me being a vet and them and handle the vets, a lot of times all they want to do is have somebody to talk to. But when they see that badge, it makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the thought there. Let's end it with Robert here. Robert, you have the last word.
Well, I'm not going to give a good ending. I just wanted to.
No. Well, this. Okay, I'm sorry.
I
Let
know.
me
I know.
rephrase. It's not the ending, but we're gonna get to the next topic after this. So go ahead.
I just meant as the ending of the topic. I just wanted to say.
No,
that,
you're fine. Man.
Amanda, you brought up some great points. Those are some things that I can't fully address. I just wanted to clarify that what I was saying was I wasn't necessarily talking about fully abolishing the police for privatized security. That would just be something that would be added as an implementation to lowering actual police forces. So I just wanted to add a little clarification for any of the viewers if they thought I was talking about a full abolishing of the police force for privatization. That was it.
Okay.
But you brought up some great points, Amanda. Thank you.
Fair enough. All right. This is the part of the stream where we're gonna get to the fun topic. This is something we did last time. We ended the night last podcast with an open question to the group, which at the time was, I think, what your favorite conspiracy theory was. And I thought it was a great way to end the night, kind of like, reduces the tension a little bit and stuff like that. So we got another topic tonight that kind of goes into that a little bit. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to start with Amanda. Amanda, which do you prefer, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Ooh.
And what most?
It is cruel for you to pick me first. I am the child of Trekkies. I am named after Star Trek characters, first and middle name. Cool. Like I went to this is not a joke. I went to my first Star Trek convention when I was 10 days old. William Shatner held me as a baby and I met him as an adult, and I've met lots of members of the Star Trek casts over the years. That being said, my dad is also a huge Star Wars fan. I grew up with both. They were both equally important in my life as a child.
Okay, that's not an answer.
So no, it is. It is. I can't. And
Sounds like
they're
a
very
lawyer
different.
answer.
One's a space western. One is science fiction in the future. I think they're different. I think they both have value. I think they can both be on equal footing. They're just different, and I
Amanda,
love both
I
of
will
them.
not
So that
move
is my
on. I will
answer.
not move on until you give me an answer.
I'm sorry. How many times have you been to Comic-Con? Because I've been about 14 times. So I
Okay,
think I'm
that
glad.
doesn't matter. Give me an answer.
She gave you a lawyer answer.
I gave you a real answer. I love. I will say personally, I do. If we're talking the movies, and I had to pick, I would say original trilogy, Star Wars. Like that's
So Star Wars is your favorite.
It's not my favorite. I'm just saying if it's a Saturday night and I'm bored and I want to watch a movie, I might pick Star Wars because I've watched it more times because my dad had it on repeat.
All right.
As a kid.
Okay. So for the rest of you here, know that is not an acceptable answer. Robert.
Too bad.
Fair enough.
I was gonna give the exact opposite answer where I was gonna say neither.
Right.
Oof.
No, I'm just kidding. I was originally a Star Wars fan, but I haven't really gotten too much into the new age Star Wars. I've watched 1 through 6, on Thanksgiving so many times over. So I would have to 100% say Star Wars, but with the whole new age concept of Star Wars, I've kind of backed away. But
Okay.
if
So
you want my simple answer, Star Wars.
So in the original trilogies, what is your favorite?
Hmm. I don't know. I'd have to say probably that's a good question. Probably The Empire Strikes Back.
There we go. Good answer.
Yeah,
Moving on, Vlad.
the right
go ahead.
answer.
Oh man. So first thing I want to say is I'm a little surprised that the most heated this conversation got today was about Amanda's
I was about to say
refusal
that. That's so
refusal
true.
to pick between Star Wars and Star Trek.
Well, because Greg was right. It was a lawyer answer. I can't allow that here. Like,
That can't be.
Before I
Greg
became a
can't be
lawyer,
right.
sorry.
I believe it is my turn.
yeah, shut up, Amanda.
Rude.
It's I'm gonna give a little bit of history before my answer. So I watched I remember watching the original Star Wars dubbed into Russian when I was still living in Ukraine.
Ooh.
And Star Trek was more of a teenage thing for me when after I moved to the States, teenager, young adult type of situation. I've recently caught myself rewatching a bunch of old Next Generation, Voyager, and all that kind of stuff. So it is a very tough question, and if you find me on a different day, it might change, but I will kind of give a lawyer answer. For movies, I'm going to say Star Wars. For TV shows, I'm going to say Star Trek.
Okay, see, that's more acceptable than what Amanda said.
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
opinion.
I agree with
Yeah.
that completely.
Yeah, thank you, Jake.
But,
Thank you.
But that is my answer. And Alex,
Hey, Amanda, this is a family-friendly broadcast. Okay, let's
Agreed.
stop that.
Is it though?
Alex, I will also say that my favorite Star Wars movie is Empire.
Rock on,
See?
buddy. Let's go to Hannah next.
Well, it's 100,000% Star Trek. I was raised on it and adore it.
Put that away, Amanda. This week, what's wrong with you?
Really, I think Voyager is probably my favorite TV show. Maybe it's just because the age that I was at when I watched it. And the female lead captain was just
Kate
who
Mulgrew.
doesn't love that. And then favorite movie is probably First Contact.
Yes.
All right, right on. Charles, what do you got for us?
Well, neither one. Mine was Lost in Space.
Oh my God. They won't even know that one.
That's a good one though.
The-
Lost in
Austin Space
Space.
is pretty dope. I'm not gonna argue.
Danger, Will
Wow.
Robinson.
Yeah, danger.
That is a very
New
good-
version or old version?
And Dr. Smith.
Obviously the old version.
Yeah.
Yes.
What'd you think of the new version?
I've never seen it.
It was all right.
It was all right.
That's the correct answer.
Special effects were pretty good.
Oh my goodness, good stuff. All right, Jake, I can't wait for this one. What do you got, buddy?
All right. So I like Amanda. I grew up with both kind of regularly in my household, but I got to see the original 3 in theaters when they did the re-release and remastering. And I agree with Vlad. Like if you wanted to dice it out, the Star Wars TV shows, fuck, they're terrible. They're awful. But the Star Trek shows are fantastic. And Next Generation was by a wide margin the best one. I mean, obviously. But in terms of movies, even though First Contact was awesome, really great movie, Empire is like leagues above. And in terms of the Star Wars movies, which are definitely my choice here, I'm only talking about the 3 that matter. The other ones are all nonsense. They're all good, but Empire ends on this awesome dark note. Your hero has one hand. The bad guys are in control of the galaxy. Boba Fett is like completely terrifying, and it ends with this like hopelessness. That's prime movie making. Everybody was queued up for the next movie because of that, and the next movie was teddy bears. Cute when you're 7, kind of lame for the theme of a movie.
Love it.
So
And
you
you
like
know what? I am a lot.
you're a definite Star Trek then.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love all of it, but yeah, if we're gonna do one or the other, it's Star Trek.
Okay.
Lightsabers,
Okay.
bro.
So another person that gave an answer. Take note, Amanda. Tyler, go ahead.
So for the first 18 years of my life, I was indoctrinated by my mother. And if she's ever to see the end of this podcast, she will kill me for not saying Star Trek. I would say Star Wars. I was indoctrinated.
What was it that made you break the indoctrination?
The movies.
Which,
The
but
movie.
which movie? There's got to be a moment. What happened?
I mean, Empire Strikes Back was
Right.
that, and then recently A New Hope. Now A New Hope, I've gotten a new appreciation for it, and then Rogue One.
Yeah.
That just I had a nerdgasm the whole entire movie. So it was great.
Yeah.
Tyler, I could watch that scene of Vader just wasting fools in a hallway for probably an hour. You could just put that on repeat for 2 hours and I'll watch that.
I feel like Rogue One should be mandatory watching like immediately before A New Hope. It fits.
It's
Yes.
I agree. I agree completely.
So how does everybody feel about the Solo film?
I feel like it was the only thing it could be. I don't think they could have really take out the weird romance and the weird like drama with Woody Harrelson, but like what else is a Solo origin story gonna be? It's gonna be how he met Chewie, how he got his name, how he got the Millennium Falcon and met Lando Calrissian, and it's the Kessel Run. There you go.
Nice.
I feel like that movie's kind of like purgatory. It's
Oh,
neither here,
yeah.
it's neither here nor there. It just kind of is.
Take it as it is.
Let's Kylan, what do you got, man? I can't wait to hear this.
So I'm gonna come strong, no pun intended.
Save that for later.
Family show.
It's after 9. He's fine.
The children are asleep.
This is Project SIP After Dark.
For more debauchery.
All right, sorry, Kylan, go ahead.
Oh man, I am 100% Trek. Trek all the way. And my favorite Trek movie, hands down, is Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. Ricardo Montalban
Also very good.
made the whole series. I can recite Ricardo Montalban lines like, "Kirk, I don't want to kill you. I want to hurt you. And I'm going to keep on hurting you. I'm going to leave you as you left her, marooned on a lifeless planet."
Damn, nephew.
There you go.
Oh my God. Now, Kylan, when I saw that movie, the only thing I could think of is a Chrysler Cordova with rich Corinthian leather. Now you won't know that commercial, but he used to be the spokesman for Chrysler. So every time he would do it in the movie, the only thing I heard was the Chrysler commercial.
Oh
Yep.
my God.
Awesome.
Greg, and then I'll give my thoughts, and we'll wrap this thing up.
This is too easy because we're older, so we started. It's got to be Trek all the way. It's going to be. In fact, the favorite TV series was The Trouble with Tribbles. Is my favorite.
Fun fact: I have a little tribble that I've.
Oh, I want one. And then when Star Trek the first movie came out, I thought it was great. Wrath of Khan was great. Star Wars was okay, but I was older, so I was already trapped in the Trek generation.
Yeah.
And then following along the storylines with all the Star Wars storylines, I just couldn't grasp it. It just wasn't my thing.
Wow.
So, I mean, they're all good movies as far as I'm concerned. I haven't seen them all, but I'm a Trek guy all the way, only because, again, I was a kid. That was in the mid 60s to 68,
Yes.
I think was when they went. And remember, we only had 3 TV stations back then. So your entertainment had to be, no matter how corny it was, you watched it.
All right. Great opinions, guys.
right,
I'm actually very surprised at how many people chose Trek here. But I mean, for me, I'm gonna go with Star Wars. And I'll even take it a step further. I'll give you my full-on ranking here. So
good
here's how I've got it: Empire first, obviously.
Nerd.
Excuse me,
Nerd.
I didn't interrupt you, Greg. All right, so we got Empire first, A New Hope. We got Return of the Jedi. From the series, the 1, 2, 3 series, we got 3, 1, and then 2, right? And then the last series, I thought the last one was the best, actually. With The Last Jedi being the worst by far. Awful fucking movie. I hate it. And then somewhere in between the old trilogy and the episodes 1 through 3, you got to put Rogue One in there. Rogue One was fantastic, in my opinion. So
After you watched it.
So to be fair to Amanda, like we are comparing a sci-fi versus a fantasy,
A space
and like yeah, no, totally. It's a space fantasy story, and like there are very different things, but Star Wars.
Well, no, and it's not just space fantasy. It's literally like in the cinematic category of a space western. It fits all the paradigms of
Totally.
the western type of film.
I mean,
And
have you seen Tatooine?
yes, yes, I have, because part of that was filmed in Yuma, Arizona, which I've driven through many times.
I was just about to say,
Oh.
it looks like fucking Arizona.
That's cool. Part of it was filmed in Marin, where I've driven through many times.
that's
To
what I'm
me-
saying.
to
Like
me,
Return of the
it's
Jedi, the specifically the what was it? The scene with the speed
Endor
bikes.
scene?
Yeah.
Bikes,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
speed
Ewoks.
bikes.
That was filmed in like Point Reyes Station, right?
Yeah.
It was at Roy's
Marin.
Redwoods in the Valley.
Very
West
cool.
Marin.
All right. Well,
Lucas
guys,
Valley.
we're about 2 hours and 11 minutes here. I think that's a good place to end it. Everyone, for those of you that stayed and hung out with us, thank you so much. It's been really fun. It's been a really good podcast. And to those of you who are still here, the next podcast will be 2 weeks from today, which will be June 25th. So if you guys are interested in sticking around for that one, we'll be live June 25th at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And additionally, if you'd like to be interviewed to be considered as a panelist for one of our upcoming podcasts, please reach out to myself, Amanda, Jake, or Kylan, and we'll be happy to get an interview set up for you guys. Again, thank you everyone for being a part of this. It's been fun tonight, and have a great one.
This has been
We'll
good.
see you later.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.